Welcome back to Eat the World. So today was a big day, or a number of days, making these sausages. And I have to thank my dad Mike for doing most of this, as I've never made these sausages before, and he's the master. So we made, now these have lots of different names depending on where you're from, but we made Kransky sausage, or Krajenska, or Kranerwurst. And we also made Kielbasa Krakowska, or Kielbasa, or Krakowska, or even Polish sausage, or even ham sausage. Two different kinds of sausages. Now, while these sausages have different recipes, they have very similar processes to make them. I will put the exact details on the recipes on my website. Now, while this isn't necessarily a hard process, there's a lot of important steps to follow. This is one of the things you don't really mess about and you just can't wing it. So we'll go through the process of prepping the Krakowska. The Kransky are very similar, except they use different spice mix and slightly different cuts of meat. And they get ground fully, whereas the Krakowska are slightly different to that. Anyways, we've already done the Kransky, so we'll begin with the Krakowska, and we'll follow the process. One is to prepare your meat, and this will be the same for the Kransky. Basically, you'll need to trim up any meat that you do use with a similar kind of method, keeping the good stuff and getting rid of the things that we aren't going to use. But we'll come back to that in a bit. So, we have a big bone-in pork shoulder here for the Krakowska. Step one is to remove the skin, which we will be using later on. So I've left this whole process run, so if you aren't familiar with it, you'll see how to debone a pork shoulder and separate it into its different usable bits for the sausages. So once the skin is off, using a sharp, long, thin butcher's knife, you're going to trim back the solid pieces of fat here. This, you'll see that there's two different kinds of fat. There's that hard back fat, which is what we want, and then there's this more mushy, almost fibrous kind of fat. We do not want to use that. So trim that right back and throw it away. So we will continue doing this until the skin and the shoulder are neatly trimmed back. This is my dad working away at this one, and he is absolutely meticulous. I almost found it a little bit painful to watch. Sorry, Dad. But I'm more of a bull in a china shop kind of guy, and he's super picky. And I don't blame him. I mean, if you've ever had a kind of cheaper sort of sausage where there's sort of bits of sinew and stuff and stringy bits in it, and it gets stuck in your teeth, you want to avoid that. And you get that with a lot of cheaper sausages. I recently bought a whole stick of Milano salami, and it was cheap, and I should have realized why it was cheap. Because it was just that. There was lots of sinew, and that's just because they want to use lots of filler to fill it up. And then they just grind whatever little bits are left over, and it's not necessarily the best quality kind of stuff there, and it is a little bit unpleasant, to be honest with you. But anyways, so you want to, if you're making it for yourself, you want to give it the best quality that you possibly can, and that's my father's philosophy. So you're just going to keep trimming that away, getting rid of any bits of sinew, keeping that hard back fat that we want, getting rid of that soft, mushy stuff that we don't want, and once we've done all that, then you're going to see the different muscles that make up the shoulder. So the pork shoulder has a different combination of muscles, and if it's a bone-in shoulder that you're working with, you're going to want to take the bone out and the shoulder blade. And you'll see my dad will start separating them out bit by bit and trimming them down as he goes. His first step is to cut around the muscles and remove enough of these to easily remove the shoulder blade that's there. And you also have the bit of bone. And he'll cut around the blade and the bone, and eventually, remove enough of it that he can actually pull it out of there. And once it's out, he'll trim any of the meat that's on there nicely, and he'll put all that to one side. After that, it's just a continuous process to separate the muscles, trim off any of the sinew and undesirable stuff, and once each piece is done, it's sliced up into strips about 3/4 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters in diameter. And as you can see, he'll just layer them out in a container, and again just continue trimming and slicing, and we'll come back to all of that later on. So as I mentioned, these sausages are very similar. So the Kransky is kind of fully ground, and the Krakowska has got big hunks of meat in it that's bound with like a stuffing, basically, like a farce. So yeah, those are the main differences. The Kransky are very simply flavored. They're just salt, pepper, and garlic. Whereas the Kranskys have got, the Krakowskas have got more spices in it. And it's more, that's it. Both of them have got pork and beef in them. So it's essentially pork, beef, the pork fat, spices, and that's about it. Both of them are then stuffed in their respective sausage casings, and they're both traditional how they're done. And then smoked, and in this process we're going to steam them to finish them off and bring them up to temperature. Okay, so once we've done all that, we're going to start weighing out the different components. So the starting place we're going to do is weigh out how much pork we've actually got, because that's going to be the solid parts of the sausage. So once we know how much total pork we've got, then we're going to start weighing out the exact amount of fat that we need within the ratio that I've got in my recipe, and then we're also going to weigh out the beef that we need, which forms part of the farce or the stuffing around it. So we'll do those calculations. It's pretty straightforward, and then we'll just get all that stuff ready, and you'll see the beef's being sliced up and weighed out so that we've got the correct ratio for that. So the beef's just gonna get cut into these chunks like that, like little steaks to get cured, because the next step is basically the curing. And once that's done, we've got our ratio set. We're going to take those strips of pork that we cut earlier, and those long strips. We're going to take those, and then we're going to dice them up into cubes, like my father's demonstrating here, because then those are going to get stuffed straight into the sausage like that. Like I said, bound in the farce. So we'll just carry on doing that. It's a bit of a tedious process, but it's necessary. So you can see there's no sinew there. It's all very, very, very just solid, lovely chunks of meat. So just carry on doing that, and then we're going to start the curing process after that. So everything goes into a plastic bin. My dad's got the steaks on top. He just sort of keeps them separate there so he can easily remove them later when he needs to. So you just want to have enough surface area so that you can easily mix things. You don't have it all bunched up. It makes it much easier in the end. So for the curing process, you'll see we've got like a curing salt, you've got sugar, and you've got kosher salt. So basically, you weigh out the appropriate ratios that you need. This is just going to go into some warm water and give it a little bit of a stir, so you make sure that you dissolve that up nicely. And then pretty much straight after that, you just sprinkle it out over the meat that you've got. And then we're going to give that a really good thorough mix. And then the whole thing's going to go into a fridge for about 2 to 4 days. And what you want to do is make sure that you're mixing it daily to make sure that everything gets coated correctly and cured properly. That's simple as that. Which we're using as a binding agent. You can also use soy protein, but basically this is just simply boiled until it's kind of translucent, and you can sort of almost poke your finger through the skin. Once that's done, we're going to put it aside and let it cool. Next, we're going to start grinding the farce, or the stuffing that will be filling in the gaps in the Krakowska. So that'll be the fat and the beef, and some skin. So like I said, we're using the skin as a binding agent. So this goes through a reasonably fine blade in your grinder a few times. Quick word about grinders. You can use any grinder you like. When I was a kid, my grandparents had a hand crank one, but a good one is worth its weight in gold. A cheap grinder won't last you very long, but you use what you have, and but my recommendation is, if you're ever going to be doing this kind of thing on a semi-regular basis, is to invest in a decent grinder, because they're really worthwhile. Now you want to make sure that your equipment is as cold as possible if you can. This helps also for food safety reasons, but also it'll help bind everything together if it's all cold, because even the process of being forced through a tube like that and ground up, that heats up your food. So you want it to have it cold, and you can even put the plates that you're using in the grinder. They can even go in the freezer beforehand. But you do want that to be in a cold environment. I wouldn't recommend doing this in a hot summer's day. It would not be ideal. My father's actually rigged up a way that he's very clever. We're in this dark room right now. As you can tell, the lighting isn't the best, but it's in the kind of like the utility room, and he's rigged it so that he can turn on the air conditioning, and that room is way colder than any other room in the house. So that's his little trick for doing this, because it's and he's very clever that way. So he's got the system down to a fine art, and all the local Eastern Europeans and Serbians and Yugoslav people, they all get him to make their sausages for him, and he's made himself quite a name for it. But these techniques I'm showing you, these are this is just one specifically that my father's developed, and it works well for him. You're going to have different equipment, you're going to have a different environment, and you just, you have to be able to play it by ear and learn to adapt with what you've got, because it is a semi-technical kind of thing to do. The grinding process is quite important, and the binding process is quite important, because if you don't mix it properly and if you don't bind it properly, then you're just going to get the fat's going to ooze out of that farce, and you get like a grainy sort of texture of sausage, which is like, it's happened. I mean, it's happened to me before. It's happened to my father before. It's a bit heartbreaking when you go through all that effort, and because you learn by your mistakes, but it's a bit of a heartbreaking mistake to learn if you go through this whole process and you're looking forward to the finished product and you kind of messed up a couple of stages, so you get a result that you don't really want, and it's and it's hard to enjoy it when like, I know this is okay, but it's not the way it's supposed to be. That's a bit of a punch in the guts. But anyway, so make sure that you put these both through 2 times. You want a nice fine grind for these, with no lumps, pretty much. So we put this through, and we're also gonna put the skin through. We'll do that a little bit later on, but yeah. Anyways, so now it's time for the mixing. Once that's all been done, I can't stress enough how thoroughly mix. If you're gonna be doing it by hand, you need to be doing at least 10 minutes of hand, and it needs to be a big sticky mess. I can't stress it enough. If it's not browned properly, like I said, you're not going to get the result that you need to get. You can use a meat mixer, or you can even do this in batches, possibly with a paddle, in a strong food mixing bowl, like a KitchenAid. But you really do need to mix this well, and mix it a lot. It's very, very important. It helps develop the proteins you need, which will bind it all together. So I won't go on about that anymore, but just once you think you've mixed it, just keep mixing it for another 5 minutes. Make sure that it's done, bound, and a big cohesive mixture. Now you can, at this stage, if you wanted to, add your spices as well. You can do them now, or you can do them a little bit later on, but we're about to start grinding up the skin, so it's going to get another mixing a little bit later on too. So as I mentioned, you're going to follow the correct ratio that you need for the skin, weighed out, or the soy protein extract, and make sure you use the right volume of that if you're using that instead of the skin, but you can use the skin. So right here, in this container, we've got the Kransky sausage mix. It's already been cured and it's already been mixed, and we're just adding the final binding agent, and it's also already had the spices in it, so we're just adding this final the binding thing to it, and then next we're going to start moving into getting these ready to stuff. So we're going to start with the Kransky, which are going to be stuffed into natural casings. There are different sausage stuffers that you can use. Obviously, you're going to use what you've got. This one that my dad's got is fantastic. It's pretty solid. Sometimes you can get some that are like it's a grinder and a stuffer at the same time. Those are good if you're using like a small volume. But like I said, my dad makes these for the local community, so he's often doing like a big batch at a time. So it's important for him to have like a decent stuffer. This one's kind of got kind of like a hand crank sort of plunger. So you'll see he's loading it up bit by bit into this sort of big tube, and then a plunger is going to go into there, and it sort of cranks down. So these are the natural casings I was talking about. You're going to want to make sure that you give them a good rinse, and then we're going to start loading this onto the spindle or the sausage stuffing spout. This is going to take a little bit of practice to do, but I just recommend, so you see how it's coming straight from the bucket there, is just make sure it's nice and wet and lubricated so it slides onto the spout as easily as possible. It's going to take a bit of practice. You might make a couple of mistakes if you've not done this before. It's easy to tear the sausage casing at this stage as well, which is obviously not ideal, but if it happens, it happens. What you just have to do is you have to tie it off where it is, and then just carry on with another batch. So if you rip it, there's not much you can do. Just tie it off, and then you're going to fill up what you've got already loaded on there, and then carry on. You can't sort of retrospectively go back and fix that. You just have to finish off what you've got and then start again, which isn't the end of the world. But like I said, this is practice, so don't put too much pressure on yourself. Take your time and do it properly as much as you can, because it can be frustrating if it starts going wrong for you. But anyways, it takes practice, and you know, with everything, practice makes perfect. So just keep going. So you can see we're at the end of this sausage casing right here, and what you're going to want to do is like tie a nice big knot in that, and then we're just about almost ready to go. You want to make sure that you get as much air out of there as well as you can if possible. And we'll start cranking in a minute. Okay, so we'll start filling these in as much as we can now. It's a good sort of two-person job, this, if you possibly can. That's why, you know, traditionally this is like a whole family day spent together making sausages, and that's what we've done. That's what traditionally things used to be like when people used to make their own sausages back in the olden days. So anyways, you want to crank it in slowly but consistently. So you want to make sure that the sausage is full enough, but you don't want it to be too full because you might split it, and you don't want it to be too soft because then it's not going to be full enough, and it's just not going to look right. So you're just going to keep doing this and going through your full mixture that you've got, and carry on. But hey, you know, if you do rip the casing, which you're bound to at some point, just like squeeze out a bit of the stuffing that we're at the ripped spot. You can see it's ripped right there in one little place. You're just going to carry on, finish doing that, and in the rip spot, like I said, you're going to squeeze a bit out and then tie it off, and then you're just going to carry on with what you've got left. Traditionally, Kranskys are tied off in pairs and separated off with a piece of wood, and they're sort of hung in pairs. Dad does them hand turned like this, and this is his own method that he's developed because he does quite a decent volume of them, so he's built himself some racks for drying this off and for processing them. So this works really well for him. He does them as a continuous coil. But like I said, traditionally they're linked in pairs. But there is a million different ways you can link a sausage. I started doing it my way because I used to make like Italian sausages, and you get into rhythm in it. You fold them up, and they're like 3 or 4 hanging off of one at a time. My dad was a bit disappointed in me and said that's not how it's done, because so you need each individual link to be not touching the other sausage, if you get what I mean, because a very important part of this process is we're going to smoke these sausages, and you want each individual sausage to have as much surface area exposed to the smoke as possible. But like I said, this is my father's method, and this works for him. If you've got your own method, use your own method, but use whatever you can use to make it work for you. But this process does really work well, and it took me going through it with him to really get a good idea of what he meant, because like I said, I've never made these before. And you want each sausage to be smoked individually and properly. Having said that, you don't want to overload your smoker as well. My dad was a little bit disappointed. He didn't get them all as smoked as he wanted them to be because his big smoker had just broken down. So he was using a smaller smoker for these. But he definitely do recommend, once you do get them in the smoker, not to overload them, and just to have as few sausages in there as you need to make sure that you get the correct effect. Anyways, you get the idea here about linking the sausages. Just continue following this process, and you won't go wrong. And once we're done that, then we're going to move on to drying them. So here, one last time, he's measuring out, making sure that the filling is consistent. He'll pinch off either end and then flip them around like that. So he's using that sort of pinching and turning to link off each sausage. So there you go. And then now we'll start drying them. Once that's all done, we're going to dry the sausages. So they're going to be hung up so that each individual sausage has enough surface area that it's not touching the other sausages, like my dad has done here on his rack, on these racks. You can use a fan to help speed up that process too. So next we've got the sausages are going into the smoker. So they smoke at a reasonably low temperature. Now you can finish these off totally in the smoker, but I'm going to give you the process for finishing it off. Firstly in the smoker, and once it's done going in the smoker, we're going to finish it off in a steamer so it comes up to the correct temperature that we need to. So this is sort of halfway through the smoking process here. You can see that they've got a beautiful brown color to them now. Once that's done, my dad transferred those racks. There you go, and he's putting them into, they're going to go straight into his steamer. And again, this is a custom-made steamer that my dad has built. It's got about 2 or 3 tiers to it, and those racks fit straight into the steamer. It's on top of a pot, and there you go. And then we'll steam those until they're done, which will be a certain temperature that you'll check with the meat thermometer, preferably with the meat thermometer that has an alarm, so you know exactly when they're done. Okay, so now moving on to the Krakowska. So these are just basically now measured off into lengths. It's not like a continuous kind of length of sausage now, or like a continuous just casing. These are collagen casing, so you'll cut them up and then tie off one end, probably about a foot long, about 60 centimeters long, I'd say, and it's got a wider spout on the sausage maker now. So again, there's 2 of us doing this. I'm cranking, my dad's filling them. And again, you want them to be nice and solid. These ones not too much worried about breaking the casing so much. So you want them to be nice and full and nice and tight. And then once you've done that, you'll fill up all of these that you've got here. And then once you've done that, you're going to, like we saw my father do, you're going to twist it and then tie it off. Again, that is definitely much more of a 2-person job. But yeah, as you can see here, we've got that wider spout on the sausage filler, because there is, like I said, big chunks of meat in there with the stuffing, and otherwise it'd get stuck if you had like only a smaller spout on this. You can even, I mean, if you're doing a small volume, you can even fill these by hand in a big wooden spoon or some kind of plunger or something like that to help fill it out. But like I said, this is always like a family or a family activity. So here's my mum helping my dad out. They kind of shoved me out of the way at this point and said, you know, like, okay, we've done this before and we know what we're doing, so step aside, son. And so my dad's making sure they're nice and tight. Mum's using her strong arms to make sure, there she goes, make sure that they're nice and tightly bound and tied up. And you see how my dad's flipped that over there, so there's no sort of loose ends hanging around. He's tying that up sort of twice to make sure that it's nice and sealed. So yeah, these are the traditional, very wide collagen casings. You could probably also use like a Kielbasa, slightly more narrow casing. But this is the traditional one that you'd expect to find. And this is going to follow the same process too. And believe it or not, we're almost done now. So once these are all filled and tied off, we're going to smoke them in exactly the same way. These are probably a lot easier to smoke actually, because there's not that many of them. Not like you would the sausages. These aren't obviously as wet as you'd find the Kransky sausages. It's just it's a whole entirely different texture with the collagen as opposed to the natural casing. So anyways, we're going to hang these up to dry a little bit later on, and then again they're just going to go straight into the smoker. And then more so with these, I think it's probably better if you finish them off in a steamer, so they're going to be nice and steamed, and you're going to get like a nice even slow cooking to the correct temperature. But you want to make sure that you're doing it nice and gently. If you cook these or you smoke them at too high a temperature, all the fat will separate out and you'll lose the textures that you're going for, and it'll become grainy. So you'll kind of lose the bind that you've created in the farce, and you definitely do not want that to happen, because that'll be a disappointing result, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. So we're going to finish tying off the rest of these and get them into the smoker, and then we're going to come back to the Kranskys. So once the Kranskys come, when they're done or they've reached the correct temperature, we're going to cool them down as quickly as possible in an ice bath. You see we've got a big tub sink ready here, and they've come straight out of the steamer and straight into the ice bath. We'll probably add another bag of ice into it as well, give it a bit of a stir, and make sure that they cool down to a nice, the correct temperature. If you let them cool down slowly, they'll shrivel up, and you'll lose that. This is an important step. You'll lose that final finishing that you want. And once that's done, they come out of there, and again we're hanging them up, and we're going to let them bloom. So it's sort of letting them stabilize out at a cooler temperature, which is just there. Back onto the racks. There you go. They're all fully cooked now. But again, I'll have all those details of the temperatures on my website. And here's the Krakowska. Again, straight into the smoker. We'll let those smoke up to temperature or for the desired duration that we want them to. And once those are done, straight into the steamer. We'll let those steam until they hit the correct temperature again. And as soon as they are done, they're going to go straight into an ice bath as well. And that's about it. I think we're just about there. You know, you want to let these cool down in a fridge, both of them, for a day or overnight, and then you're ready to eat them. The Krakowska is ready to go cold. The Kranskys, traditionally, you know, you can traditionally sort of steam them or boil them so they're nice and warm. You don't want to overboil them, but just like sort of bring them up to temperature, and there you go. There's your charcuterie, all ready to go. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoy these. They're an amazing product, and we'll see you soon. Subscribe. Thank you so much.